Did you know that? Before Indonesia became independent, the world experienced various kinds of revolutions that erupted in various countries. The background to the revolution in general was because society demanded a change in government. Well, one of the big revolutions that ever happened was the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution of 1917 was a political movement in Russia that culminated in 1917 with the overthrow of the provincial government that had replaced the Tsarist Russian system and led to the establishment of the Soviet Union, which was driven by various levels of society starting from the Mensheviks, Bolsheviks, and cadets. However, in the end, this revolution was driven by the Bolsheviks and marked the start of the communist era in this country. Ended until its collapse in 1991, this revolution can be seen in two distinct phases. The first was the February Revolution of 1917, which overthrew the government of Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, and established a provisional government. The second phase was the October Revolution, which was initiated by Vladimir Lenin from the Bolsheviks, who had a radical communist ideology, by overthrowing the provisional government led by Alexander Kerensky. This second revolution had far-reaching effects, affecting both urban and rural areas. Although many historical events occurred in Moscow and St. Petersburg, there were also movements in the countryside where commoners seized and divided land. The influence of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution succeeded in overthrowing the dictatorship of Tsar Nicholas II. The Russian people, who experienced life in various fields due to the dictatorship of Tsar Nicholas II, finally managed to gather strength and oppose his rule in the form of a revolution. The Russian Revolution succeeded in overthrowing the Russian dictatorship. Apart from that, the Russian Revolution, which had a communist ideology, finally succeeded in changing the direction of the country towards a communist state. Like other revolutions, the Russian Revolution also had an impact both on Russia itself and on countries in other regions of the world, including Indonesia. The influence of the Russian Revolution on the development of the national movement in Indonesia was clearly visible with the development of Marxist ideology, which later gave birth to the Indonesian Communist Party. The seeds of Marxism were brought into Indonesia by a Dutchman named Henk J.F.M. Sneevliet. It was on the basis of this Marxism that on May 9, 1914 in Semarang, Sneevliet together with J.A. Brandstetter, H.W. Dekker, and P. Berskma succeeded in founding the Indische Social Democratische Vereniging, ISDV. Sneevliet then infiltrated his cadres into Serkat Islam by making ISDV members PSI members, and vice versa, PSI members became ISDV members. In this way, Sneevliet and his friends have had a strong influence among SI circles, especially after successfully influencing several SI leaders, such as Saman and Darsono. As a result, the Semarang branch of SI, which was already under the influence of ISDV, became increasingly clear in its Marxist color, causing Serkat Islam to split into two parties. Party 1 remained on the side of Hos Chokro Aminoto, White Psi, and Party 2 sided with Saman and Darsono, Red Psi. 1919 ISDV was changed to the Dutch East Indies Communist Party, and then in December 1920 it became the Indonesian Communist Party. Thus, the French Revolution, the American Revolution and the Russian Revolution influenced the emergence of the Indonesian national movement. Background to the Russian Revolution. During the reign of Nicholas II, Russia was a kingdom with an undemocratic system that ruled with an iron fist. The style of Tsarist government during the time of Nicholas II included the suppression of civil liberties, intellectual freedom, and human rights. Many people complained about the inequality of economic strata and the stratification of their social classes, which ultimately led to the peak of disgust towards the bourgeoisie, which always maintained itself in luxury by arbitrarily sacrificing unlimited labor with very little wages belonging to the workers and poor farmers, with a working population reaching 80% of the total population. For this reason, the working class is a major force for social change. In growing numbers, workers sought to organize unions to win better conditions. The Tsarist and capitalist regimes often suppressed their reform efforts. This repression, combined with poor working and living conditions, caused many workers to become highly political and support revolutionary groups. Peasants, ethnic and national groups, and religious minorities have periodically rebelled over the centuries. However, in the 19th century a new type of revolutionary movement developed, influenced by the Enlightenment ideals of democracy, equality, and human rights. In the mid-19th century, many middle-class intellectuals and students became increasingly dissatisfied with Russia's repressive regime and rigid society. They engaged in illegal political activities, forming discussion groups and distributing pamphlets. Some adhered to an idealistic political philosophy known as populism, advocating social change to benefit the masses of the Russian people, especially the peasants. Others became anarchists, opposing all forms of government. Other socialist revolutionaries identified with the ideas of Karl Marx. Marxists believed that the working class, with its struggle to organize trade unions and win democratic political reforms, will be the main force for revolutionary change. Russian Marxists formed the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, RSDLP, in 1898. However, in 1903, the RSDLP split into two factions. Bolsheviks, Russian for majority, were led by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin and favored a more centralized and disciplined party. The Mensheviks, Russian for minority, were more loosely organized and included a less politically cohesive mix of radicals and moderates. Some non-socialists who favored revolutionary change to get rid of Tsarism formed a liberal party in 1905. They became known as the Constitutional Democrats, nicknamed the Cadets. This party mainly represents the educated and wealthy classes. Initially, all these political groups believed that Russia needed a revolution to replace Tsarism with a democratic republic. This would encourage capitalist development, which would modernize Russia. Liberals believe that democracy and capitalist development itself are the goal, while Marxists believe it will pave the way for socialism. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 halted Russia's political development. Russia joined Britain, France, and other countries in fighting against Germany and Austria-Hungary. The ruling elites in every country are motivated by the desire to maintain and expand their economic and political power. In Russia, as elsewhere, enthusiasm for the war effort among the masses was fueled under patriotic slogans to save the country from foreign invaders. Opponents of the war were denounced as traitors and oppressed. Pro-war patriotism swept through the cadets, many Mensheviks, and even some SRs. Lenin's Bolsheviks opposed the war and faced isolation and oppression, as did the Mensheviks who spoke out against the war. The war was a disaster for the Russian people and the Tsarist regime. Russian industry lacked the capacity to arm, equip, and supply the 15 million men sent to fight. Repeated mobilizations disrupted already insufficient industrial and agricultural production. Food supplies fell and transportation became irregular. In the trenches, soldiers were hungry and often lacking equipment. Russian casualties were greater than those suffered by any army in any previous war. Behind the front, goods become scarce and prices skyrocket. In 1917, famine threatened major cities. Discontent was rife, and army morale plummeted, further damaged by a series of military defeats. As the war dragged on, misery in Russia's cities grew. Large cities were also flooded with refugees from the front. Despite the apparent calm, many felt that Russia would soon be faced with a new revolutionary crisis. Impact of the Russian Revolution. The eruption of the Russian Revolution certainly changed the country's government system and the social conditions of society, both in Russia and the world. Following are the impacts of the Russian Revolution. 1. Spread of communism. The influence of the Russian Revolution in the field of ideology was the spread of the ideology of socialism and communism in various countries, including Indonesia. This ideology of communism is adhered to by countries such as China, Yugoslavia, Vietnam, Laos, and even Indonesia almost adheres to the ideology of communism. 2. As an inspiration for revolutionary movements in other countries, the success of the Bolsheviks led by Lenin in overthrowing the power of the Tsar and changing the country's government system has inspired many revolutionary movements in other countries. Indonesia is one of the countries that was also influenced by the Russian revolutionary movement, which was communism. The main influence of the Russian Revolution on the national movement in Indonesia was the development of Marxism, communism and socialism adhered to by movement figures. This understanding was first brought by a person from the Netherlands named Henk Sneevliet, who once lived in Russia. Sneevliet then founded the Indische Social Democratische Vereniging (ISDV) party. ISDV succeeded in influencing many figures from other parties including Serkat Islam. This caused ISI to split into two groups, namely Red Side, Communist ISI, and White Side, Straight Side. This communist party later changed its name to the Indonesian Communist Party, PKI. Since the Second Revolution, Russia implemented a communism system and founded the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. The communism system does not reject feudalism or the power held by people with capital. Communism adheres to the ideology of equal feelings.